My name is Katie Walsh, and I'm the Senior Marketing Manager at Fashion Outlets of Chicago in Rosemont. And it is my great pleasure to welcome all of you to Dialogues, presented in partnership with the School of the Art Institute in Chicago and additional support from the collection Where Art Meets Fashion, the public art program at Fashion Outlets of Chicago. Fashion Outlets of Chicago is an award-winning two-level indoor outlet shopping center located in Rosemont. It's home to more than 130 designer outlet stores. In addition, it has a multifaceted contemporary art program called the Collection Where Art Meets Fashion. It features 25 site-specific commissions by an impressive roster of world-class artists, two of which we are going to get to hear from today, as well as a rotating exhibition program. On behalf of Fashion Outlets of Chicago, I am beyond thrilled that these two amazing artists can join us today for an artistic dialogue exploring the dynamic intersection of fashion, art, and culture. Please allow me to introduce you to our panelists, esteemed artists Derrick Adams and Hebru Brantley.
Thanks everybody for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Derrick and Hebru. So as you heard, we're coming together here tonight because under the auspices of the Fashion Outlets of Chicago, where both Hebru and Derrick have amazing public art projects there. But also, even though Derrick and Hebru have been friends for a long time, this is the first time they've actually spoken in public. So we're in for a treat tonight. And
Together.
Together.
We've spoken in
We've
public.
spoken
No,
in
yeah.
public, but not together. Not in this forum style.
so, I mean, maybe just because of why we're here and under these circumstances, you could each talk a little bit about what it means for you to work outside of the gallery, out in space, in a public location like the Fashion Outlets.
Well, for me, I first started visiting Chicago probably around 2014 when I began showing with Rhona Hoffman Gallery. And from there, I just became more interested in just the culture of the city and becoming more aware of the cultural landscape of the city. And at the time, the proposal was brought to the gallery for this commission for the Fashion Outlet of Chicago to propose a light LED screen installation, a light sculpture installation for the portico going under, and then the wall, the mural. And so I wanted to do all three. So I applied for the proposal to do the mural and then the lighting, and it was accepted. And so that was the beginning of the process of designing the piece for the mall. Yeah. And it was a great experience because it was interesting to see the way the art was integrated into the experience, the viewer's experience in a mall. Yeah, it was cool.
And Hebru, your piece is much more recent, right?
It's I think it's the latest piece in the collection. But I think for me, you talk about public works. Like I started out, which a lot of people know from Chicago. I started as a graffiti kid, right, and then into street art. And so I think for me, watching how not only you transform a space, immediately, within an environment, but watching people's response to that transformation was something that it's electric, and you see people that live in these neighborhoods and these communities, and they come by and they thank you and they're so grateful because, you're adding to, this transformation to their neighborhood. And again, these people, this is their commute day to day coming in and out, and can give them a little pick-me-up, or, it does so many things. And so that was always my attraction to public works outside of the studio stuff. And I think, with the work in the mall, it was just a real unique opportunity for me to stretch. I'm always looking for opportunities to do something a bit outside of the norm. And, Derrick took all the good real estate at the mall already. So the next best thing was the food court, right? Because that's where everybody ends up at the mall. And so, to do something on an elevator, to think about, again, movement, to incorporate, a lot of that energy that I think that space sort of holds was like really important, within the piece itself.
And in this case, there's probably a slide of it somewhere up there. You have both one of your Flyboy sculptures and then a mural that goes up the escalator space too. So both of you are using 2 dimensions and 3 dimensions over there at the mall.
Yeah. I mean, the thing that I like about doing these types of projects and any public project is the audience I really enjoy the most are people who don't really care about art. I mean, they're usually the hardest people to have an experience with as an artist because they're not as invested in the language, the institution, the academic element of art. They just like it or don't like it. And I think that the curiosity of knowing more comes with just the visual experience of seeing something that you're just attracted to without the context of a label or something like that, which is associated with like a more of an institution or a gallery or museum situation. So every time I get an opportunity to make something or put something in the public space that is just very accessible to many different types of people through their travel, not expecting art, but happening to come upon it, I'm more excited about that challenge. It feels more challenging for me as an artist to put my work in somewhere that is that will get more of a visceral response. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great segue because both of you have a lot of social commentary in your work. Like there's a lot of, your work often like teaches us things. And so when you're in a situation like this where you don't know who is going to walk in the door, they're not expecting to see art, like how do you navigate that of like bringing them in easy maybe and then, or maybe you don't, maybe you kind of, hit them right in the gut when they walk in the door. I mean, how do you kind of balance that desire to talk about serious issues with your art and kind of teasing them and pleasing them with the visuals?
I think for me, it's a little bit of a cheat code because a lot of the work that I have involves like youthful expression and characters. And so it's easy to sort of kind of lure folks in with the aesthetics, but then also have a bit of a message, in the subtext sort of underneath the subject, right? And so, and then, again, like, the colors, I think that, if I can say, like, one of the reasons why I love Derrick's work so much is his choice in his palettes, right? And I think that, there's a dynamic nature to that. And I, aspire to sort of do the same thing with a lot of my palettes. And so I think, when you can pull people in simply on aesthetics alone and then kind of teach them something, or they can pick up on whatever, the messaging is, it's like a gotcha,
I mean, I think, when you look at art, like coming from an institutional background of art, you usually are taught or at least graded on art that you may or may not really care about. So you got to look at it, you got to study it, you got to see things in it that you could write about, write a 1,000-page paper or whatever on something that was assigned to you or something you had to pick out. I think it's very, I think the art that stays for the longest period of time and that people can never really shake and people become more interested in is art that really calls the viewer's attention visually. And that could just be something that may or may not be as literal for the viewer in that first encounter. But I think the interest starts to build when the viewer is interested in what they're looking at. They start to think about who made it, what was their inspiration, who are they personally, things that just come with the visual experience of being human. When you see a person and you think they're interesting, you get to fantasize about who they are. You get to fantasize where they live, who their parents are, things that I think really good art can do or visual objects can do. We all are wearing patterns and different things that came from a very particular origin, cultural origin, A lot of us have no idea what patterns that we're wearing, where they come from, but the patterns are living on. And I think that's what I think about with art. I think that people will not always understand what your work is about, but the fact that you become a representative of that idea by your actions, what you wear and what you associate yourself with as a person, I think that's the real power, I think, of art, is that people just hold on to it because they want to see it. They want to be around it. They want to understand it. They want to have it in their environment. And I think gradually they become, sometimes when people have your work, they may see new things in it every day. They might see something that they just discover one day while they're drinking coffee or something like that. And you could tell them what to see, but I think it's better for them to experience it on their own through their experience as a person. So I think about that.
I mean, for both of you, it seems like, you're giving this invitation, like you said, your work. I mean, a lot of contemporary art can be very gatekeepy and like creates this barrier almost that you have to jump over. And both of you, it seems like you're kind of inviting people in right from the get-go and then complicating things for them. I mean, do you see that as a radical act or kind of something subversive or counter to the art world as it currently exists? Is that something you consciously try to disrupt?
I think the biggest disruption for a black person is to make what you want. I think that's the biggest disruption. I think, there's a lot of things that happen in our society that we are affected by, and things that are obstacles and things that are deterring us from having fantasy, having desire, having these human instinctual things that make us complex beings. And I think that there are artists who draw from different sources of inspiration. But I think what's really important is that for people to really look at all black artists who are involved in making as a form of speaking politically. I think that when you misunderstand someone representing black normalcy as being joyful, and the fact that you think they're joyful because the subject has happened to be black, says more about the society that you're in, that to see a black figure sitting down or laughing or whatever, just conjure up this idea of like being carefree necessarily. And because that's not a normal image for most people to see. But I think that if we are able to make the work that we want to make, like look around us and see all the things that are happening in society, and look at yourself as a healer, as an artist, to kind of present to the world things that you think will correct some of the things that people may feel about themselves or about the society that you represent through your power of the pen or the brush or the paint or the sculpture. To me, I think that's more of the gift that most artists have to really understand is why they're here. And I think that you can be political, you can protest, and you can be on the street, and you can do all those things, but you don't have to have that be in your studio. You can make what you want in your studio. Like, you don't have to fulfill all of the questions that's in the world when it comes to what you want to make. Your studio is your sanctuary, and I look at my work as a way of therapy or expression or freedom. And so for me, I do believe that the work I make has a political framework, but I think the political framework is based on the fact that when you look at my work, you know that I'm saying what I want to say, and I'm telling you what I want you to see, and I'm showing you things that I think are important than other things that I don't think you should be seeing as much. And so I think artists have the ability to put out ideas into the world that will empower people to see themselves in ways that they may have not looked at themselves before as. So I think that, to me, I think even a black artist making abstraction or making floral paintings or making dot paintings or making whatever is always a social challenge when you are a part of a community or a culture where you're expected to respond to everything that happens in the world, like instantly, like journalism. And I don't think that fine artists have to be journalists in their studio practice.
Hebru, it seems like a lot of the things Derrick was saying applies to your art, and this, especially the kind of inspirational message and this sort of uplift that you have in so much of your art. Can you jump on what he was saying and expand on that?
I mean, what he said. I can't come after that one. I mean, I agree wholeheartedly. I think, what I do, especially within the context of, some of the folks within this building and is other, right? And there is and will forever be, I think, an expectation for Black creatives to create and emote, certain things. And, for me, it is about what is most important to me, right? And my journey, again, in my studio practice has always been, being honest about who I am at my core, and let the work sort of, reflect a lot of that. But yeah.
And knowing how much of that personal experience you pour into your work, how is it possible, or how does it work that people want to jump on that train and follow you and follow those stories or those narratives that you've created? Because it's interesting, what you're doing is so personal, but it opens up to this much more universal kind of appreciation.
Because I think it is universal. I think that, a lot of us, blue blood runs through all of our veins, right? And a lot of us, no matter, skin tone, background, we share similar stories. And I believe that wholeheartedly. And I think that, like, I try to speak from that place. I'm a mixed race kid from the south side of Chicago, right? And, my story, again, let me back up. I think when I started my journey, my intention was never to create things that necessarily inspired hope, but it was more about creating an outlet for myself, right? And a language within, the work that, like, helped me deal with a lot of the angst and the things that I had going on. And I think it was just a fortunate thing that what I do spoke to and through a lot of people. And I think once I realized that, I became a bit more conscious and intentional in terms of the things that I was doing, and sort of the messaging that was in a lot of the work that I was creating.
I mean, similar. Like, a lot of the things that I make are not, like, I like that my peers are making different things. I like that my peers, some of them have a very particular interest in speaking directly to the viewer, speaking on topics that are really direct or literal or didactic. I like the idea that there's a variety of different voices speaking about things that mean a lot to each person or to a group of people. I just think that there's always room for a splintering of conversation, visual conversations in art, especially within the contemporary community of artists in the Black art community. I think there is a lot of conversations about many different things. And so with my work, I always say that if I knew what I was going to do in my studio when I went in my studio, I would not do it. Because the way I work in my studio, I work with a system where color is very important to my practice. And I might contemplate a long time before I mix a color or put a color down. And I'm really thinking about the idea of, like, temperature and activation and depth and things like that are more, my interests really are, as a Black person, my body is a political palette. So for me, the formal element is the more challenging aspect of me being an artist, because I am politics. Like, I'm walking politics. I'm vulnerable. I can walk outside at any given time. Anything can happen to me because of my physical appearance. There's certain realities that you cannot escape if you are a Black person, and that's a given. But also is another aspect of creativity that is yours, and that you can exert that power of creativity in many different ways. And you could constantly feed off of the fears and all the things that are, somehow swarming around you in your reality that you have to deal with, or you can create a space and think about your work as a capsule for the future generations to see. And I think about that with my work. When I think about the idea, if I'm an artist, I'm making work now, I want younger people or people in the future to see that during this time, a black artist still had imagination. A black artist still can envision fantastical narratives. A black artist could think about color formation and composition when other artists may be thinking about things that are more related to journalism or editorial interests. I want them to know that that did not affect my ability to desire and to envision a world of creativity and imagination through my creative approach. And I think that's kind of what I think about. Like when I leave my studio at night and I don't ever come back, what people gonna see? I think about that. Like when I close the lights off, if I die or something happens to me, like all they're gonna know is what I left in my studio. And so if whatever I leave in my studio is gonna be my legacy of understanding who Derrick Adams as an artist is, and it's gonna be based on dissecting the imagery in my studio. And so I'm very conscious of like, what do I wanna leave behind when I'm no longer there? So I think about that more than I do think about the idea of answering all the questions. I think about how I want people to see that I was a person who had fun in my studio, that I had my friends come over. They inspired my work. You can see the things that I painted that are related to things that are common. And I think like I say to my friends all the time, I think if I had to say like a term or a description of my work, I think my work is more like a head nod and a fist bump. And those two things can't really be explained unless you know what they are. But I think my work is a head nod, is a fist bump and a head nod. And if you understand that vernacular, then you can understand like the way I make work.
Yeah,
FYI, don't go in my studio if I pass away. All right, just lock the door, chain it up.
Derrick, you talked about this kind of retreat into the imagination, and Hebru, it made me think about that immersive space that you created in Pilsen a couple years ago, where it was really, to me as a viewer and a visitor, about going into your head and going into this world that you created. Can you talk a little bit about that and how things that you learned from that, and how that might be leading into things that you're working on now?
Yeah, I think, again, I didn't grow up, or not grow up, I didn't sort of start in the gallery system, and everything that I did was mostly with the mindset of just independence, right? Like doing pop-up art shows, my brother Fahamu Peku, and just trying to get work wherever I could. And so I think a lot of my mentality has always been, I won't say shock and awe, but I want to grab people, right? And Derrick talks about doing public work and getting the attention of people that aren't even into art, right? And I think for me that was a big part of the goal. But like, where's the intersection of the art world and sort of the non-art world folks, the ones that have a minor appreciation for it? And when I did Nevermore, which is the installation you're talking about, I love walking into a white walls gallery, right, or a museum. But I also appreciate opportunities for a larger level of engagement with work. And I wanted to create something that felt like, touch, taste, smell, hear, and really it puts you in, not only in my head, but it puts you inside the work. And so that was the goal with Nevermore. I think, I always looked at, there's 100+ fine artists that I've looked at, growing up that, you know, I've idolized and everything. But as there are 100 of those, there's hundreds of comic book artists and animators that I grew up appreciating. And I looked at Charles Schultz, you know, growing up, who's the creator of the Peanuts. And, you know, you look at and you read these cartoons or these comic strips, and they're not for kids, right? It talks about like angst and existentialism. And I mean, it can get deep. And so I always wanted to be able to, like, how do I do that, but within the fine art space? And so for me, it was like this opportunity to create an opportunity to where you enter into a space under the guise of like a traditional art exhibition, but then are allowed to travel into a space beyond that. But it's a space where, you know, it's a mini sort of amusement park, right? And, you know, the biggest thing there was not only the visuals, but like creating a soundscape, creating something that was fully immersive to really put you in that place and transform this environment to where you felt like, again, I love the George Lucases, I love Walt Disney, you know, and the opportunities that they created, you know, for people to really understand what imagination, how far it could stretch. And so I wanted to do that, but again, sort of the melding of the two worlds, right, within the fine art space and then this experiential sort of moment. And so that was the intention. Instead of doing, you know, a series of paintings that followed sort of a prescriptive narrative, you can walk through that narrative. You know, you can, you know, there's maps, there's newspapers, there's, you know, it's a world, and you can be in it as long as you want to. And I just, you know, I always thought that was sort of a cooler, you know, more unique approach.
For sure, you know, the comic book influence, you know, I feel it in your work, Hebru. But Derrick, I've never really heard you talk about comics, and there's something about the flattening and this sort of segmentation of features in your figures and things that also has a little bit of a hint of the comics. Is that something that was an influence for you?
For growing up, of course, you know, I think most kids start off with comic illustrations as a form of learning how to draw and to draw on demand and learn how to create characterizations. But I think that as I became more, I guess, trained as an artist and looking at a lot of different things, I really started looking at artists that I find are directly relatable to the way I make color, like Jacob Lawrence, who I look at a lot. He's like one of the first artists I discovered at a young age, and is the reason why I moved from Baltimore to New York, because I heard he taught at Pratt, so I went to Pratt. And I interviewed all the people that may have known him at Pratt to see if he was, did they know him, or was he their teacher? And so eventually I got to actually meet him right before he passed, he and his wife Gwendolyn, and it was definitely a big deal. I escorted him around school for an award ceremony at Pratt, but I always looked at his work as an inspiration. And I think that when I look at artists like Jacob and then look at artists like Saul LeWitt or Ellsworth Kelly, artists who kind of work with hard edge abstraction and figuration, I look at a lot of those artists for inspiration because I think of my work as kind of merging abstraction and figuration together. And I think those combination of things rarely exist in artists' works simultaneously. And for me, that's really been my more interesting drive of art making, is trying to create dimension and color and tension and movement through blocks of color that could make a person, or it could make a pattern. It can make a bunch of different things. It can merge all these different things together. And so I really thought about my practice as a mature artist, more in line with like looking at a lot of formal instruction through artists who kind of work with things that I was attracted to. But I did start off, with, and I still think of my work as having some comical, humorous elements that could be aligned to a lot of things that are part of a comic culture. I think that most of my works don't really have a very linear narrative structure, and I think it's because I'm more interested in the idea of race as an ingredient in my work, because it's there, it's mixed in, it's part of the fabric of the work. It cannot not be that. I think that's what makes it a little bit more heavier at the bottom than most works that may appear to look like the work that I make. And I think there's a lot of kind of very subversive things happening in some of the works that I've made that everyone may not necessarily get to access based on their awareness of the subject matter in the work. And I think that's, to me, is exciting because I think that I think works can be a very interesting formal representation of an artist's idea, and I also think it can be a very strong component of content and verbal content. But I think that having a balance to me has always been like interesting for me, because I would never want to necessarily be a hard edge abstract artist, because there's a lot of rigidness and just the formation of things. So I think that combining what I like, which is the figure, with these kind of abstract forms creates a sense of balance where you can enjoy the figure, the representation part, but also the construction part, which is composition.
That's great. I wanted to shift a little bit too, just to talk a little bit about both of you moving again outside of the art world, maybe taking advantage of structures, systems, things that are even bigger than your studio practice. For instance, maybe working with fashion brands or athletic brands, or working with like in train stations and these major civic places, and wonder if you can talk a little bit about what that's brought to your practice, and if that's something that you continue to seek out.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of my practice. I talk about it all the time where, for one, I'm a collector, got a bunch of his work in my house. But,
Thank you.
even again, comics, trinkets, whatever, I'm a collector. And I think that, like, as an artist, it is a bit of our responsibility to allow, access. It's one of those things that, like, when you go to museums, you exit through the gift shop, and a lot of times, you pick up a Warhol coffee mug, right, a Basquiat sketchbook, and those artists never participated in those items while they were alive. And for me, I saw sort of within the space, again, growing up, I collected sneakers and, just trying to stay fresh, put a fit together. And so, like, I wanted to create and put my stuff on T-shirts and, hoodies, jackets, et cetera. And so I think that, for me, it was important to align with certain brands when the opportunity arose to do certain things that I just thought was cool, selfishly. And, I continue to do that because I think that not only is it still fun, right, and fulfilling, but I think it helps keep the name and the work alive, right, within certain, communities that can't necessarily afford to live with the work in other ways. But I think, for me, again, it's informative also because you can stretch. One of the things, if I'm allowed to give you flowers, like, I appreciate about Derrick is, like, Derrick stretches. It's not one thing, wash, rinse, repeat. It's like, and sometimes I'll be like, God damn, man, he's doing that too, shit. Like, but I think it's important. And I think that working within certain institutional spaces, a lot of artists are afraid to stretch because there's one thing that they've done that's gotten them to where they are, and they don't want to stray from that. And, working with brands and, and so forth, it allows you to stretch. You can try things, you can experiment because, it's it's a lower risk proposition, and you know, again, low risk, high reward type of situation. So, yeah.
What I like about you, I mean, I always see fresh things coming out of your studio with collaborations. Collaborations for me are always challenging, but the outcome is always, you know, you don't know. It could be good. It's usually not as good as you think it's going to be at the end, but um, but it does have some benefits. You know, always think about, you know, these collaborations and these things of ways of like, and that's just my personality. I usually give away more stuff than sell it when I do collaborations, and because one of the things I think about with collaboration is like, you know, and beyond getting paid, how much stuff they're gonna give me. And when that stuff comes, you know, just have it in my studio to give to my family, my friends, people that I cannot give a painting to necessarily, or a sculpture that I'm putting in the show or whatever, but I can give you something that has been mass produced by a company that I believe in the quality of the object. And I think for me, collaborations have always been an opportunity to spread the love of what you make in your studio without necessarily losing a lot of the financial income that you would have if you were to give people original work from your studio or whatever. And it's also interesting too when, and I know you do this too, think about when you're asked to do a collaboration, you have that moment as an artist to see like, does this really fit with me? Does this really fit my my ideas? Does this really fit my branding interests? You know, who are the community of people who they are soliciting with this product? Like those things I think artists think about now. I mean, if you're smart, you think about those types of things, but I think collaborations are always more about compromising in some ways, and also, but compromising in a good way, I think. I think a lot of times as an artist, you can be in your studio all the time making work. And if you're an artist who's selling work, you can just keep making work just to sell work, just to make work, to sell work, to have shows in galleries and museums, you keep making work. But I think the collaborations kind of pull you out of this space.
That's very true.
Like it pulls you out of this space. Now you got to be thinking in a different way. Like, how many units are you making? You know, what is the retail price you're asking for these works? You know, like you start to think like a totally different person that you don't think about when you're working with a gallery. You start to become like a business person.
It's the business brain. It's the business side of the brain.
You're like, how many units? How long is this licensing deal for? I want to get the contract. Like you start to be way more just aware of things that just keep you really sharp. That I think that collaborations produce those types of artists. And all the artists I know who do collaborations, who have done collaborations, have a way more sense of business than artists who have not done those things, because you can't think like an artist if you're doing collaborations. Because if they're coming to you for your image, you already won. Like, they're coming for you. Like, you made the image, they want to use the image, so it's up to you to decide where it's going to go, how many they're going to print on it, where, all those things, how long it's going to be licensed for. Those are really important questions, but I think that it makes you a better artist when you have to really switch gears and think outside of your studio practice. Because like Hebru says, these artists, when you pass away, whatever you don't want to sell is going to be sold. I don't care what's laying around your studio or whatever, cousin, mama, sister, they're going to license it to somebody, and you're going to see stuff that you would never meant to be seen wearing on people. So I think it's better for you to create the context of how your work is going to be perceived and consumed, because it creates a structure of how your work is welcomed into to the consumer world. And so it creates you get more control over things that you put out of your studio when you start off working with brands when you are alive and you're making art. Yeah, they got to show you the design. They got to show you the rough draft. They got to, you got to do a Zoom with the whole design team. Is all the stuff you got to do.
But it's great, because that's I think the artists of this generation, that's what we're afforded, right? That opportunity, to go beyond. And I think that is also a leading factor as to why art has become so popular within certain. I mean, it's. I don't want to say mainstream, but when you think about over the past, I would say 15 years, where this shift has happened. When I grew up, I don't know how it was for you in Baltimore, I couldn't admit that I was an artist or a fan of art, right? It was viewed, it was like where I grew up, that was some punk shit.
Like, you're different.
Right, exactly. And now it's a thing where I have all these younger kids and these followers that are asking me for advice, and they're young budding artists, right? And they're just living that truth of who they are and who they want to be. But I think that by allowing, artists like myself and Derrick to collaborate and do these things and allowing more opportunities for art to be seen in sort of in the mainstream, it affords, others to see it, consume it, and aspire to be.
Yeah, great point. I was going to ask you if either of you still feel that there's a stigma about doing these crossovers outside of the art world. When Murakami did it 25 years ago, his career went off a cliff for a while there. People weren't used to it, but it feels like it's become a very legitimate.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, please.
This is like a.
Yeah.
It's only a stigma when the gallery can't control it. Sorry, but that's the truth. I'm an independent artist. I do stuff direct to consumer. There's a stigma on me within most people in certain conversations. I'm a commercial artist. It's not necessarily the case, right? I want to survive. I need to take care of my family. And if I had to rely upon certain institutions to do that, I would starve to death. And I would be one of those stories where it's like, man, he was a legend and he died broke. And I think that in the case of a Murakami or a Cause or someone like myself, it's only a stigma when the institutions don't benefit from the things that are created. Because the institutions will be the first one to say to Derrick, hey, let's do a print run of such and such from this exhibition. But if Derrick goes and says, I'm doing a print run out of my studio, and it's like, well, why are you doing that? Right? And so I think, again, it's a huge pet peeve of mine about this world that we're in, because it's like you're not allowed that freedom from the gatekeepers.
Yeah. And I think being an artist is like a Game of Thrones. Whatever decision you make, you got to be about that decision. It may end your career doing that, but if you want to do it, you got to do it. If you want to make prints, make prints. If you want to put your stuff on there are always going to be some circumstances that may work for you or not work for you. But being an artist is not the most practical profession to be in. So if you're an artist and you're trying to be practical, you need to really be into a different profession. So if you're an artist, like I say before, I tell artists all the time when they say how should I price my work? I'm like, how much is your studio rent? You know what I'm saying? When you're a young artist, you're talking about you want $5,000 for a work, and you're not going to get that. But what if you sat down and priced out your whole year expense from your studio, your supplies, your cell phone, your rent, do that for the whole year, divide it into 12 months, then think about that price, think about how that could be a piece that you could sell a month that can cover your expenses for the year. A certain level of practicality to be an artist that I don't think artists think about because they have more of a fantastical idea of a fantasy of what an artist is. But the idea of the freedom of being fantastical is removing all of the other obstacles out of your way that are more practical, like paying for stuff. So I think that, working with brands are important if you have something you think could work with a brand. I think it's bad when an artist try to create something that is not in their wheelhouse to work with a brand that does not really speak the language that they speak, and you can look at them and say, even with artists, you go into a gallery, you can say, they just want to sell paintings. They don't want to have a conversation about painting. They just want to sell paintings. This is a sell painting show. There's different things that you can see as artists, like writers. You can see writers have the same thing. They can see a writer who's really a good writer, who's really complex and has very interesting things, and you see writers who want to sell books. It's the same thing with art. So I think that as an artist, you have to really think about what do you want to say? How do you want people to connect with you? And that's why I always say, like, I think working with brands are great. It's a way to pay for a lot of different things that you may not be able to pay for just working with one gallery or two galleries or whatever. But there are circumstances that can work for you or against you based on asking the right questions when you're working with brands or agreeing to work with them based on where they're putting your stuff. You know, it's all these same questions that you ask as a business person that I think is the up and down side of being an artist and working with commercial brands outside of like the gallery and museum things. Yeah.
Thank you both. I mean, I'm sorry we're kind of getting into some juicy stuff here. I don't want to cut it off, but I also want to give some time for some questions from the audience. So, do we have a microphone that we can pass around too? So if anyone has questions for Derrick or Hebru, we'd love to entertain it.
Peace. So first and foremost, 60622 resident Hebru, thank you for repairing the mural on Wood and Milwaukee Avenue. Me and my dog walk by there every day. We love that mural. So let's jump straight into the deep end here. So my friend and I, who works at the Art Institute and spends a lot of time on the continent doing research and curation, we're having a conversation earlier today where I feel like a lot of the black modern art you see is very focused on portraiture. I think there's a lot of examples if you walk up and down the aisles today. And it still really feels like monetization of the black body or black image. As artists who are successful at doing this, how do you guys manage creating or utilizing the black image to create a dialogue as opposed to an object?
Well, the fair is about objects. And so a lot of the work that you see here, you might not see in other places. You just see it here. And I think that this is the reason why you see so much portraiture representing black figures is because this is the first time in history where the black figure has been prioritized as a subject. And if it's overwhelming to people, it's supposed to do that. It's supposed to be overwhelming. It's supposed to be dense. It's supposed to have levels of excellence in depiction of detail and some, mediocre. Like I think this is the first time that you can really look at contemporary artists and contemporary black art and see the variations of types of art. And the idea of representation is not something, not too long ago, the booths were full of white portraiture. And no one said there's too much white portraiture in the art fair. And they just looked at it as being figurative art. And I think that we're at a place, the fact that you notice that so much of it is a good thing, is because it's obviously dominating the space for you to be aware of it. But I think that the idea of abstraction and figuration is something that is not necessarily in competition with each other. It's just that it shows up in different places. And this is not the place where abstraction is financially supported as much as figuration. But there are other fairs where abstraction is more dominant. So this is really based on who's coming and the collector audience who's coming. And this is a place of condensed experience with art. And so that's where we're seeing so much of it, And so your assignment or our assignment is to look at the fingers. Look at the way the eyes are painted. Look at the way the skin tone is painted. Do they know what they're doing? Do they know how to paint? Is this muddy? How this color red lays with this blue? That's what our job is right now, is to look at the painting, look beyond the figure, look at the way it's constructed. Is it done well? I think that's the conversation we need to have when you look at figurative art by black artists. Is it done well?
We're coming to you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Jalen Andrews, and Hebru, I must say, like everybody else, big fan, big fan. a Southsider. I guess my guy over there, he says 60622. I have 60643, and then also 60628 from Roseland. So must shout out to that. My question today is, when we think about, and Hebru, you alluded to this earlier about Black figures and Black role models, especially in the art space, right? And when we think about people who are trailblazers and who are paving a pathway, right, for these younger up-and-coming artists and these new thinkers, there's a lot of pressure, particularly as a Black person, to be that role model, to be this leader, and to always speak out, and to always take a step out and kind of put themselves in jeopardy a little bit, because we know cancel culture is very real in today's society. How do you balance between having such a freedom of expression, and like being yourself and this level of escapism, while also being true to yourself and true to your community and the responsibility that you carry as a Black artist? And this goes to both of you all.
I mean, honestly, I don't focus on the balance. I just think, it's gonna sound like a shtick answer, but like, it's just who I am, right? And so I think like the work that I do is a huge part of who I am. Like this is the exterior personality, Hebru Brantley, sitting in front of all of you wonderful people, talking like I actually know what the hell I'm talking about. And, but like, the majority of Hebru is I'm in the studio locked in. I'm nerding it up with, the homies, talking, having, great conversations and feeling insecure about certain things that I've worked on and, questioning things. But, it's a thing where, I can either present or not. I can either give what I'm doing to the world and release it or hold it for the rest of my life. And I think, for me, I've just always wanted to be the thing that I never had. I had a great father, a wonderful mother, but I never had the mentor or the person that I could look to directly and say, like, what they're doing is what I aspire to do, or who they are is who I aspire to be. And so that's really important to me because, again, like I felt growing up very siloed in the sense of like the things that I had affinity for, right? The things that I loved, the things that I was into as a Black kid on the south side of Chicago. And so for me, it's very important in trying to be extremely intentional about showing what I do, giving back, finding opportunities to engage, and always being a spokesperson for, the place that I come from.
I mean, for me, I always tell my friends, I have a conversation where I say I sell art. I say I don't. This is the thing I always say. I say I don't make art to sell, but I sell art. I think that I do that because when I'm in my studio, when I'm making work, I think about what I want to communicate. I don't necessarily think about where it's going to end up most of the time or things like that. And honestly, I had the privilege as a younger artist to work in a gallery in my earlier years of art making, and I had the opportunity to, be around a lot of like legendary painters and artists at this nonprofit gallery that I worked at called Rush Arts. And we had, my day was like very common for like Ed Clark to come and say hello to me, or Howardine and Pendel, or Frank Boland would call me up and say, "Young Derrick, what are you doing after work? Would you come by and have a beer?" Or, and these artists taught me about their time, that they didn't sell art, that they've been making art for this long time, and a lot of people didn't know who they were. Even some of my peers who went to school with me didn't know who they. So from talking to these artists who I looked up to so much, and they were not necessarily where they felt they should be, it really humbled me as an artist to not think that I'm going to get anywhere beyond that. And I was okay with that. I wasn't sad. I was like, I think these people are great, and they don't even know how much I think about how great they are. And if I can be just as great as they are, I would be over the hill. And so my experience for art has always been like more community focused and collaborative, and working with a lot of people but not really talking about money or selling art. So I've always kept that in the way that I think about my practice as an artist. And it's just because I just happen to be around those artists who were not selling art. And they were not happy that they were not selling art. But I looked at them like they were everything. And I just learned from being around them that art is just something that you just, like Jack Whitten. Like, look at Jack Whitten. He has a show at MoMA now. Like, if you look at his art and how he's been making art this long without any type of global recognition, most artists now would not be making work if they are not getting recognized in the first 5 years of them making art. They will stop making art because they want the recognition, want people to see them doing it. If you're making art without people seeing you doing it for 40 years or 50 years, that's what I call a real artist. Yes, that's what I think. Yeah.
I think we've got time for one more question. If there's anyone out there who wants to take advantage of these great
Who's got a
speakers.
really
We've
good
got one right
question?
up front here.
Derrick, can you talk about what you're doing in Baltimore?
Oh, yeah, so speaking on what artists do with their money. Well, I started an organization. It first started off as just a project I was doing in Baltimore. Everyone, I started making work and people started talking about my work as it relates to this idea of black joy. And it was a word that I was, kind of grappling with, a term that I felt was like trying to flatten out my work necessarily because it wasn't really talking about the dimensionality of what I was saying. They wanted to put my work in this kind of category of consumption that would allow people to like it, not knowing exactly what it's about, but just the idea of it alluding to this idea of happiness as a way of just promoting the work and putting the work out there. And then I had an idea, one day I was by myself, I was like, so would you rather be the artist of sorrow or the artist of joy, of black joy? I'm like, I think I'd rather be a black joy artist, I'm sorry, because I don't want to be associated with sorrow. I don't want to be associated with anger. If anything, I would like to be joyfully political. And I think that's the way to really think about it. But in Baltimore, I was working in my studio one day. Thank you. And I worked in my studio one day, and I said, you know what? People always writing about my work and how it has to do with like leisure and black. I said, you know what? I'm going to make it to I'll make a real place. Like, it's no longer going to be a painting. I'm going to actually buy a house in Baltimore, my hometown. I'm going to do exactly what this painting, people say these paintings are doing. I'm going to do it in person. And so I just started doing it on my own. In 2019, I bought a property in Baltimore, about an acre of space around it, green space, and I opened a residency. And the residency has been going on for a couple of years now. It's called the Last Resort Artist Retreat. We have that space, and then we have another program called Zora's Den, which is a black women publishing, self-publishing branch. We've had 3 books. There's a 3rd book called The Fire Inside. They are all inspired by Zora Neale Hurston. And then we have the Black Baltimore Digital Database, where we're teaching local community how to archive their material and how to safekeep it. And we actually built a physical, like a virtual online platform where people can come and upload their family archives onto the database and share across platforms with other residents in Baltimore. So all these things I've been doing in the community, and also getting involved in other communities that are not necessarily within my cultural group, but other cultural groups in Baltimore. I've been really actively being a part of, because I think it has to do with a balance of sorts, spreading the love to different communities that are in need. But my project, Charm City Cultural Cultivation, is something that I started, and we host a lot of different other organizations. Yeah.
Amazing. Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Hebru. Thank you, Derrick.
Thank you,
Real
guys.
Thank you.